So, the Commonwealth of Nations. It's a name you've probably heard, right? Maybe you've seen the flag or watched the Commonwealth Games. But what is it, really? And why is it so controversial? Well, in this explainer, we're going to dig into the two very different stories people tell about the Commonwealth. So which is it? Is it a modern family of equal nations all working together for a better world? Or is it just the old British Empire with a new name, something critics are calling Empire 2.0? That's the big question we're diving into today. Here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll get the basics down, what the Commonwealth actually is. Then, we'll explore that positive view, the family of nations idea. After that, we'll look at the other side, the argument that it's really a modern empire. And finally, we'll look at its complex legacy and ask what's next. Okay, so before we can get into the debate, we need to be clear on what the Commonwealth officially is. Let's start there. So, Britannica's definition has two really key phrases: free association and sovereign states. What that means is that all the members are independent countries, and, really importantly, they have chosen to be part of this group. It's basically a voluntary club, not some kind of government that makes binding laws. So how did we get here? Well, the Commonwealth grew right out of the British Empire. Back in 1926, countries like Canada and Australia were called autonomous communities, which just means they started governing themselves. A few years later, in 1931, a law made it all official. Over the decades, as more colonies became independent, a lot of them chose to join this new voluntary group, which brings us to the 56 members we have today. All right, let's dive into that first perspective, the official story, the one that sees the Commonwealth as a genuine force for good, a real family of nations. You know, this quote from the Commonwealth Secretary General really captures that ideal perfectly. The focus is all on words like unity, common purpose, and celebrating diversity. It paints a picture of a really positive, collaborative network. And here's the thing. This family is supposed to be built on shared values. In 2012, they created the Commonwealth Charter, and all 56 countries signed up to these core principles, things like democracy, human rights, and gender equality. So the organization's job is to help its members achieve these goals. A great way to see this in action is probably the most famous thing they do, the Commonwealth Games. They happen every 4 years, and people often call them the friendly games. The whole idea is to focus on that spirit of family and friendship, not just on who wins the gold medal. And get this, even the name of the games tells a story. It started out as the British Empire Games, then it became the British Commonwealth Games, and finally it was shortened to just the Commonwealth Games. You can see a very clear, deliberate effort to move away from those colonial roots and create a new identity based on partnership. But that is only one side of the coin. There's a much more critical view out there, one that sees the Commonwealth in a completely different light. Let's take a look at that now. This quote from journalist Afua Hirsch pretty much sums up the entire counterargument. The idea here is that the power dynamic hasn't really changed at all. You still have the UK, the old colonial power, right at the center of this network of its former colonies. And that makes people ask, who really benefits from this arrangement? So what's the evidence for this Empire 2.0 view? Well, critics will tell you to follow the money. This number, $1 trillion, is the estimated value of Africa's key resources. We're talking gold, oil, diamonds, that are controlled by companies based in Britain. And because of that, critics argue that Africa actually loses about £30 billion more each year through this system than it ever gets back in aid. So for them, this doesn't look like a partnership of equals at all. It looks like a system of continued economic exploitation. And it's not just about economics. It's also about people. The Windrush scandal is a really painful and recent example. After World War II, Commonwealth citizens from the Caribbean were invited to the UK to help rebuild the country. But then decades later, their own children, who were British in every way except for some paperwork, were suddenly told they were illegal immigrants and were threatened with deportation. The scandal caused huge outrage and really fueled the argument that not all Commonwealth citizens are treated equally or with respect. So, you see, we have two completely different stories. One's about a friendly family, the other's about a modern empire. How can both of these things be said about the same organization? Well, this is where we get into the Commonwealth's really complicated and contested legacy. This slide really shows the deep contradiction at the heart of it all. The official promise, way back in 1926, was all about unity. But for many people, the reality was completely different. In the 1960s and 70s, UK immigration laws were described at the time as cruel and brutal anti-color legislation. Why? Because they were designed specifically to stop people from non-white Commonwealth countries from moving to Britain. And look, this criticism isn't just coming from journalists. Even experts who study this for a living are skeptical. Philip Murphy, who actually directs the Institute for Commonwealth Studies, called the organization an irrelevant institution wallowing in imperial amnesia. Imperial amnesia just means it chooses to forget or ignore all the difficult and painful parts of its own history. This all leads to a really fundamental question. Officially, the Commonwealth is voluntary. But think about it. For many of the smaller, less wealthy nations in the group, do they really have a free choice to leave? Critics argue that after centuries of colonial rule left them economically dependent, walking away from this network just isn't a realistic option. So with these two totally conflicting stories, what does it all mean for the future of the Commonwealth? Where does it go from here? So let's do a quick recap. The Commonwealth grew out of the British Empire and is, officially, a voluntary group that promotes things like friendship and democracy. But at the same time, it faces really strong criticism for being a kind of modern colonialism, that Empire 2.0 idea. The main takeaway here is that its identity is super complex, it's full of contradictions, and it's still very much up for debate. And that leaves us with the final question. In a world that's changed so much, can an organization with such a complicated past really find a relevant and truly equal purpose for the future? Or will it always be haunted by the ghost of the empire it was born from? That's the real question the Commonwealth and its 56 members have to answer.